So this morning we are going to be talking about remote onboarding with Hanna from Futrli. And as I said, this is part of our breakfast sessions, which are very kindly sponsored by Plus Accounting. So I know we've got Vicky here today. So a huge thanks to Plus Accounting for sponsoring these sessions to enable us to share best practice from our members. And the reason we're running today's session is because we didn't really know what was going to happen with recruitment, to be honest, during lockdown. Things quietened down for a little bit, and we thought that that might be because people weren't hiring during this period. But actually, from speaking with our members, what we found is that people weren't hiring weren't not hiring necessarily because of a lack of need, but just because of uncertainty about the whole recruitment and onboarding process remotely. So last week we had a session on remote recruitment, and that video is available and I can send it around after this event. And today we've got Hanna, who's going to talk about the process of when you actually get someone into your company, how you do that, how you onboard them remotely. So the way the session will work is I've got a few questions that I've sort of pre-prepared that I'll ask to Hanna. And then if you have any questions that you would like to ask, if you pop them in the chat function, if you don't know where that is, it's sort of the top right hand of your screen. It's a little square box with some lines in it. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in there and I'll try and cover as much as we can. So just to introduce Hanna. So as I said, Hanna is joining us from Futrli. Hanna, would you like to tell us a little bit about your role there and what you do?
Yeah, so Futrli is a cash flow forecasting fintech software company, all that mouthful, but actually we're diversifying or expanding our portfolio of products to incorporate business decision-making software, because actually, at the moment, what our target market are accountants and SMEs, and what we have found over years of research is actually what makes small businesses fail is because they haven't got the right information at their fingertips in order to make the right decisions for them for the future, to protect them and to grow. So that's what we do. I'm the Chief People Officer at Futrli. I've been there almost 2 years, and we are in Brighton is our HQ. We do have a small office. Well, actually, no, we don't have an office. We have people in Belfast and Sydney as well. So yeah, we're global.
Great. So my first question was going to be, has sort of lockdown been the first time that you have remotely onboarded somebody? Is this a completely new process to you or?
No, we've always had people in Australia. So when we've done it, when I joined Futrli, there was no kind of process in place. It was real proper startup mentality, and we still consider ourselves a startup, but there was no kind of formal process in place. So we needed to ensure that actually the people over in Australia and in a different time zone were catered for, because we took on a lot of people very quickly in 2018, 2019, and we very quickly realised that actually the onboarding process was not as smooth as it should be, and we were relying a lot on the local managers. So we had to put in place something more local to help them, and so that meant us being a lot more flexible and putting more structured process in place. So we've always done that, but we also, for this particular period of lockdown and remote working, we employed 3 people actually just before lockdown. So we had someone in Brighton who'd been with us 5 days and suddenly he had to work from home. And then we also had people in Australia that had just joined us as well 4 days before, and we had to obviously accommodate that as well.
And do you think that there is a difference between onboarding someone remotely, as you would with those people that aren't sort of based in your office, that are maybe in Belfast or Australia, so that sort of general remote onboarding, and onboarding during lockdown? Have there been different sort of considerations specifically because of the challenges that are faced at the moment?
Well, yes and no, because we've always had to consider the other person. So that's always been our approach, is what is it like for them. So we've had to kind of use our empathy skills and put ourselves in their shoes. I think the fact that COVID was obviously a really worrying time for everyone meant that we had to overemphasize some of our processes. So I don't think it changed what we did. I think it changed the way we did it, and the amount of check-ins and the amount of communication and that kind of stuff. We had to kind of overlay it a little bit.
And have there been any sort of particular processes that you have introduced, sort of anything that you would suggest to other people that's particularly worked well, or maybe something you tried and didn't work as well that people might want to avoid doing?
Well, yeah, sure. So we've used a Trello board for 18 months or so as a welcome period. We call our induction period or onboarding period a welcome period. It feels a bit more human. I think onboarding for me reminds me of waterboarding. I don't know why. We call it more welcome period. So we use a Trello board, which is really super easy to use if you haven't used Trello. It's like Asana, or you could use any kind of software, or you can use an Excel spreadsheet if you want. But we kind of clearly wanted to outline, this is what you can expect from day 1, day 2, day 3, and then going forward. But we also wanted the new recruit to have a one-stop shop on where they could go for all the useful information. Because when you start in any new company, whether you're in the office or remote, it's quite overwhelming where you're going to find things. And certainly in a startup or an SME, you might not have an intranet, or you might not have somebody that's dedicated to showing you X, Y, and Z. But I think also another consideration is, even if you do have a process in place already, when you're remote working and you're working from home, you can't underestimate the amount of learning that people do just by listening. And so when you haven't got people in an office and you're not making a cup of tea next to someone and say, what do you do? Or you're not listening to how that person is selling on the phone, for example, it's a lot of that learning is done by osmosis, and it's natural. So we had to really think about that, and how do we kind of re-emphasize it and overlay it. A couple of things we did extra was the chiefs and the VP and the management team, the team leads, we got them to do an induction face-to-face, and normally they would just take them for a coffee, or when it was remote, we got them to record little Loom videos of this is who I am, because it was in a different time zone. But that kind of human interaction of just, how are you, and even in lockdown, how are you coping with this? How, more of a general how are you personal touch point, rather than this is me, this is what I do for my role. So it was more of a human touch point as well.
I think we were discussing, weren't we, that challenge around how you maybe encourage perhaps more introverted people to engage with that, because it's, as you say, it's a less natural or coincidental way of learning. And so it's trying to understand sort of those considerations for people that might not be happy to just jump on a call if they have a question or something. And
yeah, it is a real consideration. I was talking to someone this week about health and well-being, actually, and how we check in with our staff. And I think it goes back to also, with onboard with a remote onboarding and the interaction that we have. Often with a Zoom call or with a Google Meet or something, you would say, "Are you okay? Ask me any questions. I'm here if you need me." And you don't have that kind of eye contact, body contact, really body language ability to see, are they okay? And not everyone is okay with saying, do you know what, I really didn't understand that. And you've got to really, I think it goes back to now, we're going to have to think about that at the recruitment stage and really emphasize that it's okay to not be okay. Any question is okay. And when we say that anyway, but I think we just have to really, really stress that. And we're going to have to, I think, skill the managers in getting them to ask the right questions. We were talking the other day, weren't we, about there's something called a blob tree. I'd never even heard of that before, but I kind of looked at it, and it's basically an image of lots of different characters in different positions. They might be hugging each other or what have you, but rather than saying how are you, it's saying, which character are you today? And it gives the manager kind of insight in how do you, to ask some questions around how they're feeling, because not everyone is comfortable with saying, I didn't really understand, or do you know what, today's been really bad.
This feels like the wrong question to lead into now.
It's okay.
I was ask if you'd sort of made any changes to your probation periods during lockdown to sort of allow you more time to work with new employees or to sort of test them out in the workplace?
No, we haven't, not at all. And I strongly would advise not to, because the probation period, I mean, if there's lots of companies, there's lots of blogs out there, and a lot of forward-thinking companies are actually getting away with the term probation period, because again, it feels like you're in a prison and it's probation service. However, you do need a trial period, but don't forget that trial period is for the employee and for the employer. So try and soften it. It is important that that they are trained correctly and that they feel supported correctly. So you're going to have to think about, what do you need to do as a manager, and prepare as a manager of how you're going to look after them during their learning period. And we implemented something called a 30, 60, 90s. One of my team did that last year. And so on top of the manager making sure that these are the areas that they need to be trained in, or they need to be involved in, myself would check in with them as well on 30 and 60 and 90 days, and it was really checking, how was your recruitment period, how was your welcome period, anything that you feel that we would have done differently, because my belief is that everything should be iterative. It's all about improving all the time. Nothing is perfect. But to really get that feedback right from the get-go, right from the beginning of the employment relationship, is really key. So no, I don't think we should extend or the probation period. Only if you've got worries, you know, in normal circumstances, only if you've got worries about the employee. But my first point of call would be to question back to the manager, okay, what have you done differently for this new employee, and what have you done differently to make sure that they have been supported and trained and been connected in the right way?
And it sounds like a lot of the emphasis is on the managers. Are there how's your experience of that been? Because we have done some events in the past looking at how to sort of support managers. A lot of people sort of get moved into managerial roles and they feel a bit uncomfortable with it. And I imagine from the manager's point of view, that could feel like a lot of pressure during lockdown as well, to perhaps to carry that weight.
Yeah, definitely. And I've said it on many a blog and many a webinar, but managers are the linchpin to success in any company. It's really, that is, for me, when I was consulting, that was the layer that I looked at first, because often either communication, or it's kind of a stuck layer, or they're not supported enough. And that was often, like, they'd either be in a management role that you know, they're new to, they were inexperienced with. So really looking at what support you've got in place for the managers. So we started by just templating some stuff. So templating one-to-ones, templating the questions that they should ask. And not because I think it should be a staccato, robotic conversation, a one-to-one, but they needed some pointers. They needed some areas with, you know, it's okay to ask this question, and what about this? And, you know, that kind of funnel technique of questions to make sure that they're building a relationship in the right way. But also I have one-to-ones with all the team leads once a month. And some of that has increased if they felt it's necessary, and if they are you know, welcoming some new staff, to make sure that they're okay. And I've had to take, you know, everyone's really, really busy, and, you know, trying to get a new product out the door, trying to still, you know, keep going in the same way. So actually I've had to look at how I can support, and go back to, you know, more operational side of the people management stuff. So if I need to step in and do those one-to-ones, or help those managers do anything, then that's what I do, because, you know, recruitment is an expensive piece of work that we all have to carry. So it's important that we do it right. It's important that we do it right. And I think, you know, also the way that I was reading this the other day on something, that we are going to be judged as employers after this pandemic, of how we responded and how we looked after our employees and candidates, and new employees, and how people, and if people have left the company as well during this time, we're going to be judged on that. And I think that's going to be stick for a long time. So morally, ethically, and we have a legal obligation to do the right thing. So I think we have to just think about what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Brilliant. I feel like I've just asked a whole bunch of questions. I wonder if anyone has any questions, feel free to sort of unmute yourself and ask them, or pop them in the chat. Or if anyone has any thoughts as well that they'd like to share, or any experiences that they've had. Or I can keep going myself. I do have pages of questions, so because I think it's a really fascinating topic and something that we've spoken about a lot. So I'm happy to sort of keep going myself. I don't want to force anyone to unveil themselves if they're not comfortable to. So sorry, Hannah, were you going to say something before I jump into?
I was just going to mention if you have a buddy scheme or something like that. We have a buddy scheme where the idea of it, the premise of it, was to marry up somebody from a different team or a different department, if you're big enough. Some they wouldn't necessarily work with day to day, just to obviously start garnering the understanding of how all the teams connect together. But we've had to look at how we do that, because part of being a buddy was taking them for a coffee, and you can't do that. Well, you can probably do that a bit more now, but you couldn't do that at the beginning of lockdown. And if you're working remotely, and if you're widening your talent pool, because actually if we're going to continue working remotely, you don't have to recruit locally anymore. It's giving us more opportunities. So you need to think about as well, what would that body scheme look like, and how does that need to differ?
Yeah, I think that's really important as well, and that's something that I was talking about with one of our members yesterday, around actually now the sort of the pool of talent is so much wider, because people are really embracing remote working, and you might get people applying from all over the world. I know with Talent Fest, we saw job seekers attending our talent festival from all over the world, and that was really embraced by members, because they would like to have more sort of diversity in their teams. But also with that, I think it's understanding, I think we've spoken about this, some of the sort of the sensitivities around that, sort of the cultural understandings around that, and particularly when onboarding, making people feel included within the team. I've just seen a question pop up, sorry, so I'm just going to quickly. So we have a question from Sophie. So I've got a question on remote training. How do you approach this? Would you recommend a blended approach? And if so, how do you structure this?
It depends what the subject is for training. I think a lot of our stuff is on e-learning and videos anyway. It's not necessarily, classroom based. If it was, then we'd have to structure it differently. But in terms of training the new product and how to do that kind of stuff, we put it in our welcome Trello. So we signposted to people, watch this video, think about this, or set them a task. So it was more kind of task focused, because the key to a healthy remote working culture is trust and communication. Well, that's key anyway, but trust and autonomy. So how do you create that trust and autonomous relationship right from the get-go, and through from the welcome period? So we decided to signpost people, say, watch this video, read this blog, read this handbook. We have lots of we use Blissbook for like a handbook for people that people can kind of dip into training on the product. And then we would arrange a call with them afterwards and say, okay, so what did you notice about that? Not a test, but just, what are your thoughts on that? Just to really see if they understood it, and if there was any other questions. So yeah, none of our training is really kind of taught classroom based, really.
Great, thank you. Also, Vicky said, do you think that recruiting and onboarding remotely on a wider basis will impact the company's culture or ability to ensure the culture exists?
Yes, I do. I do. I think it's really difficult when you're, throughout my career, when I used to work at Magix, when we opened our New York office and our Toronto office, we tried to do this kind of culture in a box, because our Brighton culture was so unique and we were so proud of it. How do we mirror it in a different location? And it's really difficult, because the assumption is, they've got to copy HQ, but of course that doesn't work. There are nuances in everywhere you work. And I think we're going to have to look at what our values are in terms of our cultural values and what matters in a different way. I think it's not a barrier. I think it's just a different challenge. There's lots of companies that do it really, really well. So that meeting up and the camaraderie, which is often so much part of culture, we could do that in a different way. Obviously, during lockdown, it's really difficult. If you have a Zoom party, I don't know if anyone's had like a, Friday drinks over Zoom. It's really quite different, because in a normal circumstances, people would just kind of, if you were in a room, you would, 3 people would go over there, 3 people would go over there, and you'd have your little chats. But if you've got 40 people just staring at you with a drink, it's really difficult. So we've had to do different kind of challenges, and we've done like weekly challenges to try and engage the team in a different way. We did a couple of weeks ago, we challenged everyone to make beans on toast and present it like they would in a Michelin star restaurant. This week we've got to recreate movie scenes. But it's just trying to engage them in a different way. So a lot of the cultural aspect would be, meeting up, and then hopefully in the future, you can spend the time and the budget in a different way, and perhaps gather the company quarterly or half yearly, and you're all together that way instead. But I think each team has their own little mini culture as well, and so it does bring its challenges, but nothing that we can't override. But another thing that you'd have to think about if you're recruiting from a wider talent pool is, what do you pay? Because our Brighton salaries are not the same as they are in Cardiff, for example, or Madrid. They're not the same. So what is your benchmark? And how are you going to treat them? And those kind of challenges, which is, every company that has offices all over the world, going to have to think about that anyway. But yeah, if you haven't thought about that before, then you probably need to put that as part of your people strategy.
Brilliant. And I think something that we were talking about before as well, when you were mentioning about culture, was culture doesn't equal budget. And we were saying that at the time, a lot of companies are bootstrapped, particularly at the moment. And enforcing your culture and your team building doesn't have to be about sending gift packages out. It can be things like you say, just bringing people together around something fun to just keep that engagement and that social side of the engagement there. So I think there's some really good examples. Yeah. I definitely couldn't imagine Michelin star beans on toast, but I might challenge for lunch.
It was quite a fun challenge. Just to go on your point about being bootstrapped, we are bootstrapped. We don't have any budget for any niceties. And the best money I spent in lockdown was, I think it was under £10 getting some postcards, and I hand wrote a card to everyone. And the impact that had, and the amount of thank yous that I had, because often, in my kind of role, you don't often get a thank you. It's kind of, we're just there in the background, just making sure everyone's happy. And it's not often I get a thank you, but the amount of thank yous I've got, that was a really personal touch, a handwritten card. So simple. And I'm not, it wasn't my idea. I stole it from somebody else, but that's kind of a good example. Yeah, you don't need a big budget. You don't need to send everyone a, fruit basket or whatever it is.
Lovely. I'm aware we've probably got about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to check if there's anything that we haven't covered that you wanted us to talk about, or if there was any sort of key takeaways or tips that you'd wanted to share with people before we wrap up, because I'm keen to sort of finish on time.
Well, the only thing I would say is just trial something, and that's my approach for everything anyway. Kind of gives you a bit of carte blanche and a bit of forgiveness to start with anyway. So whenever I implement anything new, I would always trial it, and I would always ask for feedback. I don't know all the answers for sure, and I'm not an expert in many things, So I would always ask, how is it going to work for the manager? How is it going to work for the employee? And what's the benefit to the company? So just trial everything and don't be scared. Just, be a bit bold.
Brilliant. I think that's a really powerful way to finish. So I'm going to thank you very much for your time, Hannah. Were there any, I don't think there were any final questions. So thank you very much for everyone for joining us. Thanks to Vicky for her question and for her sponsorship of this morning. I was going to say this afternoon. It shows how long I've been awake for. This morning's breakfast session. And I'll send a follow-up email after this, hopefully later this afternoon, with the video recording. And also Hannah did a webinar which last week.
It was a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, we did Futrli did a webinar with, it was myself and another external HR consultant slash employment lawyer, who and it was on furloughing and the flexible furloughing and what to do if people don't want to come back from work, and basically the future of work now. So it was a good webinar, if I do say so myself.
Well, I think it sounds really helpful. So I'll also include a link to that in the email that I'll circulate. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for bearing with me as I've sat here getting incredibly warm under the sun spotlight. And yeah, I hope you all have really great days. And we've got the final one of these sessions is next Wednesday or Thursday. I can't remember. I should have written it down. Next Wednesday or Thursday. And we're looking at the whole recruitment and onboarding process from the employee perspective. So I think that'd be really helpful to hear from someone who's just gone through this process, how they found it. And also now they are about to recruit themselves. So they're sort of talking about it from both sides, as Joni Mitchell would say. So, right, I'm going to leave you to have a nice day, and I'll speak with you all soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye.